People were in awe of how Barron Trump turned a simple act of kindness into a movement. Thanks to him, perspectives on homelessness had changed. The winter mornings of New York City could not halt the city's never-ending chaos. As people rushed to work, clutching coffee cups and listening to music, they tried to ignore the biting wind. But for Henry, who sat on an old bench in a secluded corner of Central Park, this morning was no different from the rest. Henry, in his mid-50s, had a weathered face and sorrowful eyes. His worn-out coat and torn boots were no match for the freezing cold. His hands trembled, not so much from hunger but from the cold, though he was accustomed to both by now. People usually didn't even glance at him, instead lowering their heads and walking past. Henry had once been a successful watchmaker, but financial struggles, health issues, and losing his family had brought him to this state. He clutched a worn-out pocket watch tightly in his hand. To him, it wasn't just a timepiece, it was a memory of the happier life he once had. Slowly, he opened the watch's cover and read the engraving inside. "Time heals all wounds." He tried to believe those words, but for Henry, time had only brought more destruction. Sighing, he looked up and observed the people walking through the park. That's when a tall, well-dressed young man caught his attention. Henry studied the young man's face carefully. His hair was neatly combed, and he wore a dark coat. His confident walk and the aura he radiated suggested he wasn't an ordinary person. A few passers-by also seemed to notice him, glancing curiously. Henry was certain he recognized the man's face, though he couldn't place where from. He didn't want to let him just walk by. Feeling his heart race, he gathered the courage to call out, "Excuse me, are you—" The man paused briefly, turning toward the source of the voice. His eyes settled on Henry, a faint curiosity showing on his face. "Yes?" the young man asked, his tone polite but a little distant. Henry hesitated. Could he be mistaken? But what if he wasn't? Summoning his courage, he continued, "Are you Barron Trump?" The man smiled faintly at the question. "Yes, I am. But do I know you?" Henry shook his head in surprise. No, of course you don't know me. I recognize you from television." "Are you really Barron Trump?" With a hint of humor in his voice, Barron replied, "Do I look the same as I do on TV?" Henry smiled shyly. "Maybe a little more real. But I didn't expect to see you here alone." Barron walked over and sat next to Henry. "So who are you?" he asked, curious. Henry wasn't used to such questions. Most people ignored him entirely, yet here was someone genuinely interested in him. "Me? I'm nobody," he said quietly. "I used to have a life, but that's all in the past." Barron noticed the sorrow in Henry's voice. "Would you like to tell me about it?" he asked. Henry hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Henry. I used to be a watchmaker. My greatest passion was fixing watches. These small mechanisms that measure time, each one holds its own story. Think about it. Watches bear witness to the most important moments in a person's life, at weddings, goodbyes, new beginnings. But life sometimes brings you to a point where even time itself feels meaningless." Barron listened intently, the compassion in his eyes encouraging Henry to continue. "I once had a beautiful life," Henry said. "I worked in a small shop with my wife and daughter. Every day people brought their watches to me. Some were priceless antiques, others were ordinary. But I treated them all with the same care because my job was to give people back their time." Henry's voice started to tremble. "Then one day I lost my wife in an accident. That day, time stopped for me. The ticking of clocks and the flow of customers no longer mattered. I stopped going to my shop, debts piled up, and eventually I lost everything." Barron quietly absorbed Henry's words, feeling the weight of his story. "And this watch?" Barron asked, pointing to the pocket watch in Henry's hands. "What does it mean to you?" Henry's eyes fell on the watch. "This watch. It belonged to my father. He was the one who taught me how to fix watches. It's the only thing I have left from him. Nowadays, I have no other watches to repair, so this one is a symbol of my past. It's all I have left. Barron, moved by Henry's story, took a deep breath and felt the urge to share something of his own. Henry, he said, what you've told me has deeply touched me, but I want to share a part of my story with you. Henry was surprised by these words. Someone like you? How could you have a difficult story? He thought to himself. But he listened quietly. Barron began to speak. One day, when I was a boy, my father took me to a charity event. People were donating food and clothes. But at the end of the day, something caught my attention. My father stopped his car to help a homeless man living under a bridge. The man's eyes were filled with fear and hopelessness. My father was determined to help him, to change his life. Barron's voice grew more serious. That day, my father told me, son, never look down on anyone, because one day you might find yourself in their place. Those words have stayed with me my entire life. Henry was moved by Barron's words. Your father taught you a very valuable lesson, he said. Barron nodded, his mind racing with thoughts. He looked at Henry and made a decision. Henry, I want to help you. No matter what you've been through, your skills still have value. Let's find a way to get you off the streets. Henry shook his head, his face a mix of emotions. No one has helped me for years. People prefer young and strong individuals. Who would want someone like me, old and worn out? Barron stood up, gently placing a hand on Henry's shoulder. Maybe you just haven't met the right person yet. I believe in you. If you'll let me, I'll do whatever I can to help. Tears welled up in Henry's eyes. Why do you believe in me so much? He asked. Barron replied earnestly. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Life can be tough, but the right belief at the right time can change everything. Barron immediately got to work. He arranged temporary housing for Henry and reached out to an old watchmaker in the city, sharing Henry's story and skills. The watchmaker agreed to give Henry a chance. For the first time in years, Henry had a job again. Meanwhile, someone had recorded Barron's conversation with Henry, and the video went viral on social media. Millions of people watched, amazed at how Barron's simple act of kindness had sparked a wave of inspiration. Donations poured in, the shelter expanded, and many others like Henry found hope. Henry quickly adapted to his new job. As he repaired watches, he often thought of the man who had saved him. He was no longer just a watchmaker, but a figure who had touched the hearts of many. Barron took the story even further by founding an organization to address homelessness. The foundation didn't just provide shelter, but also offered vocational training and counseling. Barron's initiative quickly gained momentum across the country, changing people's perceptions of the homeless and inspiring them to extend a helping hand. Henry became one of the foundation's first volunteers, sharing his story to inspire others. Each morning, as he walked to work, he wasn't just fixing watches, he was spreading hope. The intersection of Henry and Barron's lives became a light in the darkness, changing not only Henry's life, but the lives of thousands. Barron's extraordinary compassion transformed perspectives and ignited a movement. There's always a second chance. Listening to someone's story can change the world. This brings us to the end of the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell.